Welcome, Formula One fans. This is the Formula One News Hour, and I'm your host, Jonathan Steele. And today we've got a little bit of news, and of course, we're excited. We are going to have an interview with Sir Jackie Stewart. So, a big day for us here at the Formula One News Hour. And but first, let's get to the news. And of course, the big news this week is Christian Horner, and he's big news for all the wrong reasons. He is being investigated for inappropriate behavior. Now, what is inappropriate behavior? It can be anything from, touching, relationship, sexual type relationship, could be yelling, screaming. In today's world, it can be anything. But one of the things that I've been reading is how many people are ready to say Christian Horner is guilty. And to me, this is a very sad state of affairs in the world today. It's only been about 6-8 months ago, a young doctor was flying from Miami to New York, I believe it was, and he was sitting next to a 14-year-old girl. This 14-year-old girl decided to accuse him of inappropriate behavior. She said he was masturbating while sitting next to her. As it turned out, this was totally false. But the young doctor was arrested. He was fingerprinted, he had his mugshot taken, and then he had to hire defense lawyers to defend him, all because of a false accusation. And that, to me, is getting to be more and more the case these days. Yes, there are certainly a lot of incidents of inappropriate behavior, and it should be dealt with accordingly. But I think Paige Spiranak, the golfer, probably had the most interesting to say about Christian Horner's condition this week, because all indications is that he was verbally abusive, which he is apparently to all people. Who would have thought that? I've met Christian Horner quite a few times, seems to be a fairly mild-mannered man, but certainly if he was or has been verbally abusive, that's not good. But Paige said something very interesting. She said, we as women spend all our time trying to get into a man's world, and then when the men act like men, we complain. Now, I've always taught, I have 2 daughters, and I've told my daughters, always remember all men are stupid. Yes, that includes me. All men are stupid, and we do stupid things. And certainly, usually when I'm referring to men doing stupid things, it's having inappropriate relationships or touching or whatever with the opposite sex or it could be the same sex, I guess, in the workplace. And that, people should be allowed to go to work and feel unhassled and work freely, no matter what their agenda or preferences and stuff like that are. But men will do stupid things. So has Christian Horner done something stupid? Nobody knows. But what bothers me is the number of people that are willing to say he's guilty, throw him out. This is a sad state of our world. The accuser is believed instantly, but the defender is not. The defender's got to spend a lot of time, money, like the young doctor in New York that had to spend, he went through the embarrassment, he was fired from his job. All these things happened to him because some person, in this case it was a 14-year-old girl, decided that they were going to make some accusation against her. What she got out of it, I don't know. How did they know that this young doctor was innocent? Well, his fiancée was sitting next to him. Not the 14-year-old. She was another seat over. His fiancée was sitting next to him and could verify. And also a number of other passengers around said that nothing of that happened. This incident happened on a plane, as I said. But anyway, let's get back to the exciting news. And I wish Christian Horner the best. I think if he's a boss that yells and stuff like that, I'm not for that. I think good leaders don't have to yell and scream and shout. But I've heard a lot of people say that Bill Clinton, as president, president used to yell and scream and shout at his subordinates all of the time. So, everybody does it, I guess, at some point. But anyway, back today's event. We do have, of course, Sir Jackie Stewart as our guest on the Formula One News Hour. But before we get there, let's take a moment to thank our sponsors. Our sponsors, as always, is Thynology, a small data center in Austin, Texas, supplying co-location, public cloud, private cloud, and all things technology that you might need. So please go to Thynology.com if you need technology for your business. Also, we want to thank Moms for Liberty. Moms for Liberty doing what they can to get you, yes, that is you, involved in your child's education. Get onto school boards, parent teachers associations, join the Moms for Liberty organizations. They've got over 300 chapters now throughout the country, and let's get our kids back to learning math, English, and science, all those things that are going to help them during the course of their career after they leave school. And of course, Give, Send, Go, the crowdfunding place that has no censorship rules or anything like that. They want to help everybody, not just people that believe in their own political sphere or beliefs or things like that. So please go to GiveSendGo.com. That's GiveSendGo.com. Good morning, Sir Jackie Stewart. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. It's indeed even for me this afternoon.
It is this afternoon. Well, welcome to the Formula One News Hour. It is a great privilege for us to have you as our guest. And it's afternoon in Switzerland, and you got a lot of snow there this year, or just about average?
Good. Well, I'm here to try and clear your vision of what you wish to discuss. Are these dead or are they alive? These? Sorry, I'm just checking the picture.
Oh,
no, it's okay. I'm speaking to my PA here.
Okay.
What are they?
Can't see your screen, Jonathan.
You can't see my screen? Hang on.
Can't see.
There you
Not
go.
that it's necessary.
How about now?
Yeah, I've got you now.
There you
I've got
go.
it.
Okay, I can take my glasses off now. We're alive and everything. So, yes, it's good to have you this morning or afternoon and your time. And what about the question on snow? Do you have a lot of snow there this year?
No, it's not been. It was the very top sort of areas here have been good, but generally speaking, it's not been a big ski year. It's still going on, of course, but I think there's still more to come.
Okay.
Where are you at the moment? Where are you?
In Austin, Texas.
Oh, okay, good. Oh,
yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
Okay, listen. Why don't we go on then and see what I can give you and your wishes?
Okay, well, as just a background, the Formula One News Hour really, when there's no races going on, we specialize in the history of Formula One. So we've done all of the drivers from the 50s and some of the 60s and so forth. So we're going to go through all the way through to today, which brings us, of course, to you being a driver in the 60s and probably, I would have to say, one of the greatest drivers to come out of the 60s. So the first question is, we had Lotus, McLaren, Brabham, Ferrari, and you went with Ken Tyrrell. What was behind that decision? He was kind of the new guy on the block, no?
Well, Ken Tyrrell came before Formula One did, in the sense that I was doing club racing for the Curia Corse, the Scottish team. And I was doing that as my first real entry into motorsport. I hadn't been a racing car person at all. I was trap shooting for Scotland, then for Great Britain. But I started because of a young, very wealthy Glaswegian, actually, from Glasgow. His family allowed him to have good cars, but weren't allowed to go and race. So I was the mechanic who was to look after his fancy cars. And as a reward for that, he gave me the chance to drive. Now, I give you that only because it took me to a Curia course, the Scottish team. And
Okay.
Jim Stewart, he drove for a Curia course. So that was my beginning. So that was British sports car racing. And that lasted for a year and a half, I suppose. And Ken Tyrrell had been given the heads up that I had got the lap record at Goodwood in a quite an old, modern at that time, but old Cooper Monaco, and I had a lap record with it. And the track manager knew that Ken was looking for a driver and suggested he looked after me. So I went down and he took me on. So coming back to the real part of your question, from Formula 3, I started to be successful right away from the very first race. I won it. And then I got the odd Formula 2 drive from Lotus, for example, just once or twice when Jim Clark was doing something else. And then BRM spoke to me at the French Grand Prix to see if I'd be interested in racing next year for them. And that was only in July, so that was a big deal for me. Mm-hmm. So it was, in fact, BRM that got me into Formula One. And that's where I won my first Formula One race, was in Monza that year. So I stayed with them for 2 years. And then Matra came along, the French aerospace. And we had been doing well, and they had seen Ken Tyrrell operate as well as myself. And they said, would I be interested? They had a program for Formula One. And we took that up. So I went from BRM, not to Cooper, not to Lotus, or Ferrari for that matter. I went to Matra because they were one of the most remarkable companies, led by one of the most remarkable chairmen and CEOs. So we won the World Championship in a Matra. And then they decided they wanted to have a 12-cylinder car. I didn't want that. I wanted to stay with a Cosworth. So we parted company. And that was when Ken, none of the other racing teams would agree to sell their cars to Ken. Brabham could have gone with Ken Tyrrell and I. Lotus the same. None of them would go because Ken Tyrrell they thought would be a threat, and I would be a threat to the factory teams, the works teams. So that was when Ken Tyrrell got the March with a Ford Cosworth engine, because that was what I wanted, to stay with the Cosworth engine, because it was the Ford Cosworth engine. So it was a bad year. The car was not competitive. I won a race. I think I won the Spanish Grand Prix with it. I was always up there, but it was never good enough. And it was then that Ken Tyrrell decided to build his own car, and did that in a remarkable fashion. And I stayed with Ken Tyrrell because I believe at the time he was the best in the world. Colin Chapman, of course, was fantastic. But Ken Tyrrell was a solid man with, in every respect, a gentleman and a good businessman. So
you proved to be a very, if I could just interrupt, you proved to be a very faithful friend, driver, and it seems that's part of your life, is that you're a very faithful person to whoever you're with.
I like to think that I choose my friends well, and Bill was definitely like that. So the friendships I've had in Formula One and in my sporting life and my business life have all been pretty good people. So Ken Tyrrell was the master of that. And that took me right through to the end of my career, actually, as a racing driver.
Correct.
But in those days, we all had to race beyond Formula One because the money wasn't big. So we would do Formula Two, we'd do touring cars, we'd do Can-Am cars, we'd do Indy cars, we would do GT, etc. So I would be racing sometimes with Maranello Concessionaires, the Ferrari team in the UK. I would be driving a Formula 2 car sometimes with the Lotus Formula 3 team when I wasn't driving for Ken. And I went to America and drove touring cars in America. I won the in a Lotus in a what was it? It was Cortina, the race Cortina near Washington. I won the 12-hour race there. So we all did that because in those days, Formula One even wasn't very rich in respect to driver contracts. So we all drove different categories of the sport in order to make a living.
Which brings me right into my next question. Question number 2, you've actually led into it. The Formula One drivers of today pretty much seem to be we're Formula One drivers, and that's it. And you guys were able to jump into different cars, all different, designs and shapes and engines and all that, and you could win in them. I mean, Jim Clark is still the only driver to win the Indy 500 and the F1 championship in the same year. Why do you think that is? Is it the way they're training today? Is it the way that you guys grew into racing? Why do you think that is?
It is financial because now if a Formula One team buys a young up-and-coming, he might be in other formulas, and actually he's not just coming out of the blue. He's already, that driver's showing himself to be a potential leader for the future in Formula 3 or Formula 2, etc. So today, the Formula One teams need the feeling that they only have a driver driving for them, which means that they do all the simulators now in their factories for every Grand Prix before they ever get to France or Italy or America for a race. And they know that by the, so completely. So therefore, rather than have those drivers go out and drive other formulas or touring cars like Jim Clark or Graham Hill or Jackie Stewart, we would be driving any number of cars in a year. I crossed the Atlantic, I think it was 68 times when I was doing Can-Am and Formula One and touring cars and GT cars. And that was the only way you could make real money. The Formula One money wasn't necessarily all that much. And therefore, if Jim Clark did it, I would do it. Or Graham Hill and so forth. We all did it financially. And some of those relationships led to long-term friendships. I mean, the Ford Motor Company, for example, it was because of a man called Walter Hayes. He was British and he was very keen on motorsport, but he then even got to a stage where he was Henry Ford's right-hand man. So therefore, I got to have a major contract with Ford that went for a very long time. And all these other relationships came because in those days, we did the Can-Am at the same time as we were doing Formula One or Formula 2, and crossing the Atlantic 60-odd times in a year was a remarkable thing because I was also working for ABC's Wide World of Sports. And again, that was for me an interesting part of my life with Jim McKay and all of these
I remember
top line
that.
people. So we did those versus the current Grand Prix driver. The Grand Prix driver has come from karting originally from
Yes.
8 years of age. I mean, that's already, it could be younger than 8 when somebody starts to go kart racing. Now, there isn't a single driver who hasn't spent all his time getting into karting. Lewis Hamilton, for example, his daddy, I think, had 4 jobs to afford Lewis to go karting internationally. And then Ron Dennis picked him up. Now, once you're up with a Ron Dennis or a McLaren in that case,
Mm-hmm.
unless it's a car of the same brand, you wouldn't be driving. Now, to make any money, for me, and I'm Scottish, and I had a wife, and I've got 2 children, so I wanted to make as much money as possible. And probably at that time, I was making more money than anybody else because I was winning. I had Ford Motor Company, I had Elf Aquitaine, I had Matra, I had all sorts of major sponsors. And they took me around the world. I mean, I would go with Ford Motor Company when I was with them, winning the World Championship. I would go around almost every country in the world with them. I would be meeting the president of every country that I went to because Ford would have a factory in that country, whether it was India or Pakistan or wherever it was. Or when I went to Argentina there, because Ford were in Argentina, I would go and play golf with the president of Argentina. So my life was a different one than what I would say the current Formula One driver. The current Formula One driver, myself and Emerson Fittipaldi were, I think, the first 2 drivers that ever had trainers, had physical trainers with us, traveling with us and working with us to be better physically than let's say the previous generation of drivers. So it was a time of change. There's no question about that.
Yeah, I asked Mario Andretti about that, how he stayed in shape, you know, compared to what you see all of the workouts, and as you say, you guys started it, the workouts that the current drivers do. But Mario Andretti, he was like you. He said, well, I just drove cars every day of the week, and that kept me in shape.
Well, I agree with that. And Mario, of course, was a great ambassador for America as well as Italy because of him living in it, obviously, in America. And he, you know, he might have felt that that was the way to do it. Emerson and I thought it had to be physical to keep fit. We, of course, did this probably more races than Mario even when I was doing Can-Am, because America's quite small in its formula of motor racing, whereas in Europe, we've got everything racing. So naturally, the IndyCar drivers would do there, but there wasn't that many races, not many races. So anyway, the fitness thing was something that I started with Emerson, and he and I were the only ones that were doing it at the time. But it was okay, but I still had a duodenal ulcer that hemorrhaged because of I crossed the Atlantic was 67 times. Time changes, you know, distance races, doing only once Le Mans, but we'd be doing a 12-hour race in France outside Paris. We'd be doing one in Australia. We'd be, you know, all this time to make a decent amount of money. You had to do all of those things.
Yeah, in a previous life, I traveled a lot. I traveled 45 weeks out of the year internationally, so I know exactly how that feels and the toll that it has on the body. But I want to go to something else that you guys were able to do, and I thought about this a lot. You know, if you look at a lot of the racing drivers of the 50s and 60s and somewhat into the early 70s, you guys were able to, you either grew up around cars, you know, you had or you were able to take your own cars apart, build them back up. You knew exactly how the cars worked. And yet, last year, during one of the Formula One races, it's evident that today's Grand Prix driver has no idea how the car works, because Verstappen was going in practice and he lost a drive shaft, and he radioed in. He says, "I've lost my engine." And Martin Brundle said, commentating, says, "No, he hasn't lost his engine. He's lost a drive shaft." And that really pointed out that, because Martin, of course, grew up fixing cars and working on cars and stuff like that. So do you think it helped the teams that you guys were so intimately knowledgeable of how your car worked, how it was put together, versus they rely totally today on data?
Oh, yeah, I don't doubt it at all. I think we've had more experience over a wider range. We'd be doing it touring cars and Lotus Cortinas, for example. We'd be doing Maranello Concessionaires, which was the British company that Ferrari gave the best cars to. We would race for him. We'd be doing touring car racing. We'd be doing Can-Am with a Lola in my case. And that meant, you know, you were learning a lot from other people in other areas. I think we were more versatile in those days, but the current Grand Prix driver is a very well packaged individual.
Very.
He has driving from the age of 9 in karting, and he's come up over the various different levels. And when he gets to Formula One, he gets in right at the top of something very big. Now, I don't believe they know nothing about the cars. They probably don't know everything about the cars. I go along with that. But there's so much visiting goes on in the factories, not just for the simulators. But today it's a different world. In my day, there was 7 people running the Tyrrell team at a Grand Prix. Now there's 160 at a Grand Prix for each team.
14 just to change the tires.
And in addition to that, they've got communications going back to the factory in England, for example, or in Maranello for Ferrari, where they're sitting with 100 people in a theatre type room, getting all of the information and everything that's going on in the car. They're getting that, and sometimes they're finding that there's a problem before the guys at the racetrack know. It's now a very sophisticated, very high technology program that when I was racing, they were the most sensational racing cars in the world of that time. But now that level has gone up and up to the point where now there are no versatile Formula One drivers. They don't do a sports car race. They don't do anything like that. They certainly wouldn't bother doing Le Mans anymore. I mean, I only did Le Mans once because my schedule wouldn't allow us to do all of the other supports. But we would be doing a big race outside of Paris that would be a 12-hour race or sometimes just a 10-hour race. So I think we had more versatility in that, and commercially we were dealing with different people as well all the time. So we had to learn to do things in a way that I don't think many of the Formula One drivers could expect to do that today. I mean, you talk about Indianapolis. I only did it twice with a Lola. I nearly won it. I was leading with 8 laps to go when a tanker and the oil system broke down. But that same year, I went to Japan with Indy cars to drive at the Mount Fuji racetrack, and I won that race, but we ran it in the opposite direction. Then it's still there today. But he was there, and Mario was there, and everybody else was there. But that was a very unusual thing for us to be able to go to Japan, for example.
Yeah.
But it was terrifically, as an individual, we were, I think, enlarged in our knowledge and what we had to do. Media is bigger today than it was then, but there's more access in my time to media than there is today. So the sport has changed, but it's changed for the best. And today it's a better sport than it was in my time. Having said that, my time was wonderful, other than the fact that we lost so many lives.
Yes.
The racetracks were unsafe, no firefighting, no medical facilities to speak of. It was a different world. So I have lived through the high and the low in that respect. But, one racing driver is not much different than the other racing driver. Some are slightly fast.
Which leads me to my next question. So my next question is, Fangio once said that the car, the team, is responsible about 60% responsible for the car driver winning the race, and the driver was 40%. He said over time that will change, and he said the percentage of the team and the car will go up, and the driver percentage will go down. Do you agree with that statement? And if so, what do you think that percentage is today?
Well, first of all, I think Fangio was probably the greatest racing driver that's ever lived. And he was very versatile. There's been a lot of very good racing drivers, but Fangio, for me, was the greatest. And I would still say that today. I would put Jim Clark up in that category as well. But I think that we learned more because we were driving different cars of different characteristics. We were racing with different engineers and media people. We had more experience on a broader base in my period than there is today. I'm sure of that. But I have to say today is better than yesterday. It's today the sport is in better shape, it's better managed. Safety, I mean, I had an awful lot to do with that, as you're probably aware. And now, how long has it been since a racing driver died in Formula One? A very long time.
Long time.
Because we've got the race car now, the cockpit's a survival cell. The medical facilities at a Grand Prix is as good as any medical specialist in the world.
Yeah.
Everything is better today than it was before. Some people say, "Oh, great old days, Jackie. You must have loved it that way." It was. There were great days, but there was a lot of sad days. And this sport today is better than it was, for sure.
I completely agree with that. And you just answered one of the other questions that I had, which was, who do you think is the greatest Formula One race driver of all time? And of course, you answered that with Fangio. I'm a little biased. I think Jim Clark was, because he was my hero as well. So.
No, I would put Jim up there, obviously. And Senna would be up there, obviously.
Yes.
Currently, the driver who's winning world championships at the present time is a first-class driver too. The only reason I say Fangio was just that little bit different than everybody else. and he just was a master. But Sterling Moss, for example, could
Amazing.
drive anything. He was versatile, and I'm godfather to his son. He was a great man. Jim Clark was the smoothest, keenest driver I think that I've ever seen. I learned a lot because we're both Scottish. I learned a lot. We spent a lot of time together. We traveled together, etc., etc. I think that I would put him up there, just below Fangio. But everybody would say yes, but you must have put the Brazilian up there. And he would be up there, but for him to put a fast lap in, when he came into the pitch, his eyes would be absolutely over alive. He was over the limit in himself. Jimmy Clark and Fangio and people like that were quieter, smoother. But, of course, he was a wonderful driver. So I think that, there's several. Verstappen today is the best driver in the world.
Sure. Right
now, in my but there's been a lot. Obviously, there's been a lot of very good drivers, but there's the only one or two that really stand out to be very special.
Okay, so my last question, actually, it's a little different, because I want you to talk a little bit really about the race against dementia. We have a few things in common, you and I. We both grew up in the kind of the borders area. You have dyslexia. I had a brother that he died by drunk driver, but he was dyslexic. And Helen, your wife, has dementia, and my mother-in-law is suffering from dementia. She's in a like an old person's home where she has around it. So can you talk to us a little bit about the race against dementia and how you started it and where you see it going in the future?
Well, I didn't even know it existed until Helen was identified as having dementia in the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. I didn't even know what it was. Helen now is very far along the road with dementia. It's a terrible illness for a whole family because it affects a whole, affects husbands or wives, it affects children, it affects everybody. More people die of dementia now than any other illness in the world. Can you believe that? More than cancer, more than all of these other names. And yet there's no cure. So we started Race Against Dementia because of Helen. And now we've got it as a global charity. It's still growing, still more to be done. And we've got to find a cure, because the latest statistic states that for everyone born today, 1 in 3 will die of dementia.
Wow.
Now, that as figure is frightening. So we've got to do something. I've just come back from the Mayo Clinic myself. That's where Helen was identified of having dementia. We've put a unit in there specially for dementia into the Mayo Clinic. We're getting closer, but it's still no cure. So we've got a lot to do. And to do that, we've got to buy talent. So we buy the very best young talent in the world. Because now with the internet, you can go to the very best medical universities and find out in the internet who is the highest ranking individual, man or woman, in that group. So we then buy those people for a minimum of 5 years. And we extend that if they're available beyond that 5 years. So we have a great group of really talented people. So far, we've got no cure as it stands. But the Mayo Clinic, for example, there's got a special unit that one of our young professors are working in with other people. And that's one of the most, well presented, more equipped facility than probably any other medical center in the world. So we are gaining, but we haven't beaten the beast yet by any means. So I started Race Against Dementia. We use it in Formula One. Formula One has chosen Race Against Dementia as their charity, which is very important because we've got to raise money to buy the young PhDs.
Exactly.
And we pick them up from the world. And then we position them in the best possible universities or medical centers. It's been a big thing. I've stepped down from being CEO of it to my second son, Mark. He now leads it. I'm still very much involved in everything, but I think youth is important. I'm now, what am I now? I'm 84 at the present time. Or is it 83? I can't remember. But anyway, I thought it was time to get more youth in. But we've got Edsel Ford, for example, is one of our trustees.
Oh,
we've got some of the best. We've got some of the best names in the world as our trustees, and we think we're going to have a major role to play in finding a cure for dementia. Anything that you can take out of this interview will go to Race Against Dementia. I'm just going over to America. I'll be there for the Grand Prix in California. After I go to the Masters tournament coming up, because I'm with Rolex, I'm going to the Masters, and then I'm going to what's the name of the Grand Prix in outside Los Angeles? Not a Grand Prix, it's an IndyCar race.
IndyCar race, yeah. I don't know, to be honest. Can't remember. I've watched it quite a few times.
Long Beach.
Long Beach. Okay, yeah. That's a nice
part of the
world. Yeah.
Oh, very nice. No, I'm going to be there, and they're benefiting Race Against Dementia. That's why I'm going. So I'm heavily involved in that. But I've got two sons, and they're both involved, and we've got very good trustees, the best in the world, I think. So we want to, in my lifetime, I want to have a fact that we now know how to get an end to dementia. The brain is unquestionably the most complicated piece of kit in the world. But, people go to the moon, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
And we can't get a medical thing fixed. There's got to be more done.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, ourselves included, that are really thankful for the work that you guys are doing, and there's other organizations. Excuse me, I've got allergies a bit this morning. There's other organizations, for lung disease and heart disease, but certainly I think the thing about dementia is that you have the person, but you're losing the person while they're living. And I think with other diseases, they just die. But with dementia, you're witnessing, every time I see my mother-in-law, each week or each month it is, then you can see a little bit of her is dying. And yet she's very much alive. And so it's really a horrible disease. And I think it's great that someone of your stature in the world is bringing a really eye-opening for the rest of the world to see, and looking for a way to cure it for others.
Well, I mean, Helen lives in this house.
Yeah.
She's at the moment going down to the clinic close by for a little treatment, but she's here 24 hours a day. But I'm fortunate enough that I can afford to have medical looking after Helen. We've got, I think, 7 medical specialists who live not all at the one time, 2 at a time, 24 hours a day. Now, very few people can afford that. Luckily, Motorsport's been kind enough to allow me to be able to afford looking after Helen, and we'll have her in this home that we're in here now, or the one we have in England. That's where Helen's going to be. But it's very frustrating to think that for over 70 years, there's not been a cure created. I mean, there is there's cures for almost everything else if you get it early enough. And here we've got an illness where there.
Well, so Jackie, we have to bring this interview to a close, and we will certainly do our part to promote the organization Race Against Dementia. But we want to thank you, Sir Jackie Stewart, for joining us today on the Formula One News Hour. Okay, folks, that's the Formula One News Hour for this week. Today is February the 9th. Wow, the year is flying by already. And of course, we want to thank our sponsors being Give, Send, Go. Give, Send, Go, a crowdfunding entity for when you get into a financial problem. Maybe you had a car wreck. Maybe you got high medical bills. Maybe it's a family or a friend. Maybe you want to start a business and you want to raise some money that way. Or you just want to help some of the other folks out there in the world that have come across hard times. Please think of Give, Send, Go when it comes time for your crowdfunding needs. That's givesendgo.com. Also, we want to thank Moms for Liberty. Moms for Liberty doing all those things that they want you to do. That is, get involved with the school board. Some of the founders of Moms for Liberty were actually school board members. So get out there, become part of the school board, join a chapter of Moms for Liberty. There's over 300 of them in the country. And of course, get on your Parent Teachers Association. Become involved in your kids' education, because what they're teaching right now in our schools throughout this country is not the best. And oh, by the way, this country is, I am living in Austin, Texas, so I know I don't sound like a Texan or sound like an American, but yes, this country being the United States. So please get out there and support your support your teachers that are teaching the right things, and let's get those teachers that are out there promoting their own social things, where we're having LGBT, we're doing drag shows, and we're doing all those things that's not going to help our kids one little bit when they get out of school. Let's get them learning the things that is going to help them when they're out of school or out of college. So please go and help momsforliberty.org. And of course, we want to thank our friends at Thanology, another one of our longtime sponsors. They're one of the greatest places to get all of your technology needs, whether it's co-location, private cloud, public cloud, disaster recovery. Please give the folks at Thanology a chance to earn your business. That's Thanology.com. So this is Jonathan Steele saying thank you for joining the Formula One News Hour, and also Jonathan Steele saying thank you to Andre Kuhn for all of the great stuff that he does in getting this podcast out there so you can hear or see it or whatever it is you do with it. But thank you, Andre Kuhn, our producer / all things technical guru. This is Jonathan Steele saying until next week, thank you for joining the Formula One News Hour.